Spring 1947, Mason County, Texas. The war had been over nearly 2 years, but for Sam Holloway, age 19, it still echoed in the sound of engines. Every tractor that coughed or sputtered reminded him of the army trucks that had thundered down the county road when he was a boy, full of men in uniforms and dust. His father's farm sat on the edge of what had once been Camp Bernay, a wartime German POW site now stripped of its wire. Only the concrete posts remained, weathered and half hidden in mesquite. The army had left behind a few sheds, a water tank, and one man. Technically, he wasn't supposed to be there. The War Department paperwork said all German prisoners were repatriated months ago. But Hans Krüger, a 26-year-old mechanic from Bremen, had petitioned to stay as a civilian laborer. He'd been assigned to help dismantle the motor pool, and when no one came to replace him, the county simply forgot. Now he worked quietly for the neighboring ranchers, fixing trucks, tractors, windmills, anything with an engine or a heart that still wanted to turn. The first meeting Sam first met Hans on a hot April afternoon when the John Deere's clutch exploded halfway through plowing the north field. He'd been wrestling the transmission loose for an hour when he heard a soft German accent behind him. "You hit bolt wrong way," Hans said. Sam turned, wiping sweat from his eyes. The man standing by the fence wore faded khaki pants, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands stained with oil. "Didn't ask for help," Sam muttered. Hans smiled slightly. Maybe Tractor did. Against his pride, Sam stepped aside. Hans knelt, studied the gearbox, then tapped one pin loose with a gentle knock that made the whole assembly sigh apart like it had been waiting for permission. "See?" Hans said. "Machines like to be asked, not forced." Sam frowned but couldn't argue. "You work on these back home?" "On everything," Hans said. "Before war, cars. During war, tanks. After war, tractors, best of 3. That line made Sam laugh in spite of himself. "You sound like you plan to stay." Hans shrugged. "Texas sky larger than any prison." Suspicion and supper by Sunset the Deer was running smoother than it had in years. Sam's father, Ray Holloway, came out from the barn wiping his hands. "Who's this?" he asked. "Mechanic," Sam said. "Says he worked at the old camp." Ray narrowed his eyes. "German?" "Yes, sir," Hans answered before Sam could. The older man studied him. "You one of the fellas they forgot to ship home?" Hans nodded once. "Maybe I'm what war forgot." For a long moment, the only sound was the engine idling, steady as a heartbeat. Then Ray said, "Well, I don't hire politics, I hire hands." "You eat?" Hans blinked. "Eat?" "Yes, always good idea." That night he sat at their kitchen table, awkward under the soft light of the kerosene lamp. Mrs. Holloway served roast chicken, potatoes, and biscuits. Hans bowed his head before eating. So did they. It was the first quiet grace the house had known since Sam's older brother hadn't come back from France. After supper, Hans offered to fix the windmill pump as thanks. Ray waved him off. "Tomorrow's fine. Sun's gone," Hans smiled. "In Germany, we work until dark. In Texas, dark comes later." The town's eyes, by the end of the week, news had reached town that the Holloways were letting a kraut mechanic sleep in their barn. Some folks shrugged, others didn't. At the feed store, Sam overheard 2 veterans muttering. "Can't believe old Ray lets that enemy near his tools," one said. "Next thing you know, he'll be rebuilding their trucks for the next war." The other laughed. Sam wanted to shout that Hans had rebuilt their tractor, that he'd saved them weeks of labor, but he bit his tongue. Instead, he went home and found Hans under the hood of the family's pickup, humming softly. "What's that song?" Sam asked. Hans looked up. "Old folk tune. In Germany it means keep moving." "Does it work?" Hans grinned. "Truck or people?" That night they drove into town together, Sam at the wheel, Hans beside him, to deliver a load of eggs to the co-op. Conversation was slow but easy. When a local sheriff spotted them, he simply tipped his hat. The silence that followed felt like permission. The lesson in repair over the next months, Hans became part of the farm's rhythm. He taught Sam how to tune carburetors by sound, how to listen for hesitation like a heartbeat skipping. "Engines tell truth," Hans said. "They cannot lie long." Sam began keeping a notebook of everything Hans taught him. Timing marks, spark gap measurements, German words for tools. The entries slowly blurred into something else. Small notes about patience, kindness, forgiveness. One evening, as they repaired the windmill under a copper-colored sky, Sam finally asked what he'd been avoiding. "Did you ever fight Americans?" Hans paused. "I fixed engines that went to battle. Maybe some hurt men who looked like you. I think about that when I fix tractor now. How machine can hurt or help, depending on who holds wrench." Sam nodded slowly. "My brother never came home. I'm sorry, Hans said. Then every bolt I tighten is apology. Neither spoke again for a long time, but something in the air between them settled, like two wires finally grounding the same current. Seeds of Tomorrow by late summer. The fields were heavy with cotton. The war news had shifted to Reconstruction, and Ray Holloway received an official letter from Washington reminding local authorities that all foreign nationals of enemy origin must register repatriation. Ray read it at the breakfast table, jaw tight. Looks like they remembered you after all, Hans. Hans set down his coffee. Then I go, but maybe not forever. Sam stared at the paper. Can't they make an exception? You're working honest, Ray folded the letter. Government doesn't know the meaning of that word half the time. Hans smiled faintly. Is okay. Home needs hands too. They spent the next week working from dawn till nightfall, patching the last fence line, overhauling the tractor one final time. On the last evening, Hans showed Sam how to etch a small mark on the flywheel. 2 interlocked letters, H and S. For memory, he said. So when engine turns, we both there. The next morning, a government truck came rumbling up the road. Hans packed a single bag. Wrench set, pocket knife, the blue work shirt Mrs. Holloway had mended for him. Sam followed him to the gate. What'll you do when you get home? Hans thought a moment. Start again. Maybe fix what war broke. They shook hands, firm, reluctant, unfinished. The truck pulled away, raising a plume of dust that hung in the air long after it vanished. Sam stood there until the wind carried it off. Bremen, 1947. The ship smelled of rust and seaweed when Hans Krüger stepped off at Bremerhaven, carrying the same duffel he'd brought from Texas. The harbor looked like a city remembering how to stand. Warehouses half collapsed, cranes frozen mid-gesture, the air full of soot and silence. He found his sister, Greta, living in one room of a bombed-out apartment block. She hugged him like someone testing whether ghosts were solid. You're thinner, she said. You're smaller, he teased, then looked around. And home is shorter, she smiled tiredly. Roof fell last winter. We keep only half. That night they ate black bread and canned beans by candlelight. Greta asked about America, about Texas. Hans tried to explain Sky, how it went on forever, and how even people's tempers seemed to widen underneath it. They fed you? She asked. They trusted me with their tractors, he said, amazed again by the sentence. And they gave me family for a while. He didn't mention that he missed the sound of Sam's laughter, or the smell of motor oil warming in sunlight, letters and longings in September. A parcel arrived, an envelope thick with dust and American stamps. The return address read, S. Holloway, Mason County, Texas. Inside was a short note, written in careful block letters. Hans, we finished harvest. Tractor still runs like you built it yesterday. Pa says you'd make a fortune fixing Fords here. I kept your initials on the flywheel. Every time it turns, I hear your voice telling me not to force the bolt. Hope Germany gives you better days. Sam Hans read it 3 times, then sat down to write back on brown wrapping paper. Dear Sam, here tractors are hungry for parts. Streets are holes with houses around them. But people start singing again. You tell your father that a mechanic in Bremen keeps Texas dust on his boots. Maybe one day engines will need both of us again. He mailed it with 2 ration coupons tucked inside. German postage. He joked later to Greta. A life in ruins. Through that winter, Hans found work in a small garage rebuilding generators for the occupying forces. He repaired Jeeps that once chased men like him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but work was work. At night, he sketched plans for a new kind of plow that could be built from scrap aircraft metal. He called it the Peace Plow. You're still dreaming American, Greta said. Dreams use the same fuel everywhere, he answered. When spring came, he mailed the blueprint to Texas with a note. Sam, if you ever try this, tell me if Earth forgives metal the same way people do, Texas. 1948, the Holloway farm had a good year. Rain came on time, and the cotton shone white across the field like surrender flags. Sam read Hans's letters under the windmill, sometimes twice. His father pretended not to notice, though once he said quietly, You write that fella back. Decency's rare enough without borders. So Sam wrote, every few months. They swapped advice about engines, crops, and, slowly, about life. Hans wrote that he'd begun teaching neighborhood boys how to repair bicycles. Sam wrote that he'd started taking night classes in mechanical design at the county school. In one letter, Sam enclosed a photograph, himself beside the rebuilt deer, a cigarette hanging from his grin, H&S scratched on the flywheel clearly visible. Hans kept it pinned above his workbench, next to a small Texas flag drawn in pencil by one of his students. The storm in 1950, a flood tore through Mason County. The river rose 10 feet in a night, carrying fences, cattle, and half the lower crop. The tractor survived, but the gearbox filled with mud. Sam stripped it apart by lantern light, muttering Hans's instructions from memory. Listen before you tighten. When he finally got it running again, he sat back in the rain and laughed, because the engine coughed, wheezed, and then settled into a rhythm that sounded like home. A week later he wrote to Hans, "Flood took half the field, but your machine held. If I ever have a son, I'll teach him engines the way you taught me, by listening first." Across the ocean. Again that same month, Hans received a scholarship, an American exchange program for skilled European craftsmen to study modern agriculture. The sponsor list included Texas A&M. When he saw the word Texas, he laughed aloud. "Looks like the engine turns both ways," he told Greta. She wept at the train station when he left. "Write me if you see wide sky again," she said. Reunion, May 1951. 12 years since war had made them enemies. A train rolled into Mason County under a sky so blue it hurt. Sam stood at the platform, older, broader-shouldered, wearing his father's hat. When the door opened, Hans stepped down, taller than Sam remembered, hair silvered at the edges, carrying a new toolbox. Neither spoke at first. Then Sam said, "You still hit bolts the wrong way?" Hans grinned. "Only when I miss Texas." They shook hands, then hugged like brothers who'd spent too long proving they didn't need to. Ray Holloway met them at the truck. "Well," he said, "looks like the mechanic found his way home." Hans stayed 2 months, teaching at the agricultural school by day and helping on the farm at dusk. He showed Sam new fuel mix tricks, ways to weld cracked steel with copper wire. At night they sat on the porch drinking weak beer and stronger memories, the town's change of heart. The same townsfolk who once whispered now stopped by with engines that wouldn't start. A war widow brought her late husband's motorcycle. A rancher asked Hans to repair his windmill. Soon the old nickname Kraut Mechanic was replaced with "that German fella who fixes anything." During the county fair, the local newspaper ran a feature titled, "Enemy Mechanic Returns as Friend." Under the photograph, Hans in grease-stained overalls beside Sam, the caption read, "If you listen long enough, even an engine forgives. A quiet farewell." When the program ended, Hans prepared to return to Germany. On his last night, the Holloways held a small supper. Mrs. Holloway baked a pie from the recipe Hans had written down years earlier. "Half apple, half plum, so neither country wins," he joked. After dinner, Sam handed him a small box. Inside lay a polished wrench engraved H and S, still turning. Hans closed the lid slowly. Engine's end. Friendship still runs. They walked out to the field one last time. The old deer stood under the moonlight, quiet. Sam turned the crank. The motor caught, steady as a heartbeat. "You hear that?" Hans said. Sam nodded. "Same song as before." Back to Bremen years later, Hans opened a small workshop on the outskirts of Bremen. Above the door he hung a sign carved by hand. Krüger and Sons, mechanics of all nations. He had no sons of his own, but he meant it anyway. Photographs of the Holloways covered the wall. When local children asked about the strange initials H and S, he told them, "It stands for a good engine and a better friend." Bremen, 1967. The wind off the Weser smelled of iron and rain. The tram lines rattled. Bicycles splashed through puddles. Sam Holloway stepped off a bus holding his hat, blinking at the city his old friend had once described in letters. Beside him was his son, Michael, 16, all restless curiosity and Texas drawl. The boy craned his neck at the stone buildings. "Dad," he said, "this place looks like it fought and won and fought again." Sam smiled. "It did both. You'll see." They walked 2 blocks until the sign appeared. Letters hand-carved into oak and darkened by age. Krüger and Sons, mechanics of all nations. The shop sat between a bakery and a tailor. Windows fogged with the breath of work. Inside, engines slept in various stages of repair. Tools hung in military order. The smell of oil and polish was the same everywhere on Earth. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, wiping her hands on a rag. "Guten Tag," she said, then switched to English. "You must be Mr. Holloway." Sam took off his hat. "That obvious, huh?" She laughed softly. "Hans spoke of you often. I am Greta Krüger, his sister." Something in the way she said spoke made Sam's chest tighten. "Is he—" Greta nodded. "He passed last winter. Pneumonia. Quick," they said. He was 71. For a long moment, the rain outside filled the silence. Michael looked at the floor, unsure what to do. Greta reached under the counter and brought out a wooden box. Before he went to hospital, he asked me to give this to you if you ever came. Sam opened it carefully. Inside lay the engraved wrench he'd given Hans 15 years earlier, and beneath it, a folded letter. My brother Sam, engines fail, but friendship keeps turning. If you ever come to Bremen, fix one more machine for me. The old tractor out back. It hasn't started since the snow. Maybe together we can hear it sing again. Sam's throat closed. He knew I'd come. Greta smiled. He said you would finish what you started. The last repair behind the shop sat a small yard littered with parts. Under a tarp rested a green tractor. German make, 1940s vintage. Rusted, but familiar. Sam ran his hand over the hood. Looks a lot like ours back home, he murmured. Michael grinned. Think it'll start? Only one way to find out. They set to work. Greta brought coffee and stayed to watch. Sam loosened the spark plugs while Michael drained the tank. He taught you all this? The boy asked. Every bolt, Sam said. Set an engine's like a man. Give it patience, it'll tell you what's wrong. The distributor was seized. Sam tapped it gently with the wrench, their wrench, and felt it give. When he pulled the crank, the motor coughed, sneezed, then settled into a slow idle. Greta's eyes filled. He would have liked that sound. Sam smiled through the noise. He's hearing it. They let the tractor run until the smoke cleared and the rain turned to sunlight through the clouds. Legacy on paper inside the shop office. Greta showed them Hans's desk. Every drawer was labeled in English and German. In one lay dozens of notebooks, letters, sketches, bits of poetry, and pages stamped H&S. Among them, Sam found an envelope addressed to the next generation. Inside was a single page written in Hans's careful handwriting. Teach your sons to build, not break. Teach them to listen before tightening. Tell them that every friendship, like every engine, needs oil and time. Michael read it aloud, voice catching. He sounds like someone you'd still want to work for. Sam put a hand on his son's shoulder. Maybe we do. They spent the afternoon helping Greta sort through tools. For each item she handed him, she told a story. How Hans had rebuilt bicycles for local children, repaired a church bell for free, refused payment from widows. He said, she added, if I charge too much, Texas will hear me and laugh. Evening at the river that night, Sam and Michael walked along the Weser. The city lights rippled on the water like welding sparks. Michael kicked at a stone. Dad, he said, was it hard being friends with someone who used to be the enemy? Sam thought for a long time. It was harder to admit I ever thought of him as one. He looked up at the dark sky, the same one that stretched over both continents. War teaches you to count what divides you. Hans taught me to measure what holds. Michael nodded, silent. Homecoming back in Texas a month later. The farm looked smaller. Ray's old windmill creaked. The fields were half fallow. But when Sam turned the key on the John Deere, the engine fired on the first try. The H&S engraving gleamed faintly under the dust. He and Michael spent the next weeks rebuilding the fence and painting the barn. One evening, Sam took out Hans's letter and read it aloud by lamplight. If you ever come to Bremen, fix one more machine for me. Well, partner, Sam said to the empty air. We did. Michael set the old wrench on the mantel. Maybe we should build something for him here. Sam looked at the field where the horizon swallowed the sun. Not maybe, he said. We will. The memorial engine by fall. The Holloways had restored an unused shed by the county road. They filled it with photographs. Hans and Sam by the tractor, letters, a copy of the Bremen newspaper article from 1951. Above the door they hung the wrench on a plaque that read, The Mechanics of Peace, dedicated to Hans Krüger, 1900-1966, and Samuel Holloway, 1928. Enemies once, friends forever. If you listen long enough, even an engine forgives. At the dedication, townspeople came from miles around. Some remembered the whispers of 1947. Others only the legend that had replaced them. The local school band played a hymn. After the ribbon was cut, a reporter asked Sam what the plaque meant. He looked at the crowd. Farmers, veterans, children with oil on their hands. It means fixing things beats fighting about them, he said. The boy who learned to listen years past. Michael studied engineering, later opening a small repair shop called H&S Works. On the wall hung a framed photograph of two men under a Texas sky. One American, one German, both squinting into the sun, both smiling like they'd already won something larger than war. When customers asked about the letters, he'd tell them they stand for patience, and for two men who never let history pick their friends. Every Christmas, He and his father mailed a donation to Greta's neighborhood school in Bremen for their machine shop program. In return, Greta sent photographs of new students learning to rebuild engines. Hands black with grease, eyes bright with purpose. Epilogue, 1977 on. The 30th anniversary of Hans's arrival in Texas. The old John Deere was still running. Sam started it at dawn and drove slowly along the fence line. The sun came up behind him, turning the field gold. He stopped by the shed, touched the plaque, and whispered, "Still turning, Hans." Then he took the wrench from its mount, tapped the engine once, and listened. It purred like memory. Michael arrived a few minutes later with his own son in tow. A boy of 10 clutching a spanner too big for his hands. "Grandpa," the child asked, "did you really work with a German soldier?" Sam smiled. "He wasn't a soldier when I met him. He was just a man who could make things run right." The boy looked puzzled. "So, were you friends?" Sam put a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "We still are." The boy bent down, listening to the tractor's rhythm. "It sounds happy," Sam nodded. "That's because it remembers." The wind carried the sound across the field. Steady, timeless, forgiving, and under that endless Texas sky, the lesson Hans had left behind kept working. Gear by gear, heart by heart, engines end. Friendship still runs.